Hello, everybody. So we are back for another career and spirituality conversations with my friend and colleague, Stephen Dargan. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
How are you, Julie? Delighted to be here.
It's nice to have you. So Stephen has been the biggest champion I know for happy workplace environments, changing the culture where people can be happy because it benefits everybody. And so we're going to have a conversation around this and like how to spot the good companies to work for, what to look for, how to initiate change. And as usual, we'll talk about spirituality and how that ties in with why being happy at work is. Sounds obvious, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know why it's not obvious. It hasn't been so obvious for so long. But Stephen, you're going to be the man to really explain everything to us for that. So my first question is usually always to investigate a little bit what's your relationship with spirituality, and then launching into your own story and free flow from there.
Well, thank you very much. So what's my relationship with spirituality? It's always an interesting one because I think the word spirituality is a lovely all-encompassing sort of word, rather than, I suppose, we can get like tied down in the ideas of religion. And I suppose maybe a lot of us, specifically because I'm Irish, would have grown up in a particular religion. But certainly, and that would be sort of the early years of my life where the church would have played a big part in my my experience of my youth. But I slowly began to move away from that. Not that I moved away for any particular reason, but I just began to think that there was always something bigger in the world, and I didn't quite know what it was. And maybe it's not definitely connected down to the rules and boundaries that some form of sort of a church or a religion tends to need to have. So yeah, I was always interested in the idea that there was something bigger out there. And I kind of like that idea. There's something, the idea that, you know, whatever entity it is, I don't know what it is, it is out there, we're connected to a universe or whatever it might be. And I suppose through my teens and later into life, I began to make a greater connection with that, with some of the things that I got in. Yes. So we were talking about spirituality, and I suppose my connection with the idea that there might be something bigger there. There's a universal experience that we're all having. And I think there's something very calming in that idea that might be true. And I suppose for years I've been interested in that. Like in my background, I'm quite interested in meditation. I'm quite interested in sort of connecting with some sort of a higher self. I've done that through, I developed an interest in Reiki about like almost 20 years ago, became a Reiki master. And I just like that sort of connection with energy. And then from that, now I've moved into other modalities that I work alongside. I do pranic healing at the moment, which I kind of like. And it's just that connection with no sort of rules or regulations or having to turn to any particular place at any particular time to be able to make that connection wherever I am. And I suppose one of the most spiritual experiences that I had ever had was I decided about 2013, which was just 10 years ago when my father passed away. I'd always wanted to be able to walk, or I'd heard about the story about the Camino in Spain, and people talked about this pilgrimage that would happen for an 800-kilometer route from the south of France right across through the north of Spain into Galicia. And I'd read about this for years and always wanted to do it and never had a chance to do it up to that point, and decided that year was the year to do it. So in 2013, I spent over 5 weeks walking across Spain step by step on the most spiritual and connected journey I've ever had. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I was going to gain. I didn't know what I was going to find. And I just had the most sort of, I suppose it's what would you call very present experience, very connected to everything that was going on. And all these wonderful little coincidences and serendipitous moments happened on that 5 weeks, and met some of the most glorious people that I've ever met in my life. And yeah, that's another example of being connected or finding ways to connect through other forms.
That's powerful. What was it for you? Is it what's the biggest takeaway or if there is one experience that was particularly impactful for you there, what was it?
So there was two things that, well, one of the things that was a disconnection and reconnection. So it was a disconnection of needing to be switched on all the time. I know 2013 would have been when social media first came to the the forefront. Well, it was gaining momentum at that stage, and it was the ability to be able to disconnect from that and just go step by step when you get up at 6:30 every morning to avoid the heat, with your backpack on your back, and just walking to the next destination. So you had purpose and meaning in every day, but it was the connection to everything that was around you. So I remember walking those early mornings and seeing the sunrise over the hills, the smells of Spain, the tastes of Spain, and then the voices of Spain, and then, you know, the people that I met along the way that were strangers that became friends. That was the sort of the, I suppose that was the energy that I got from that, you know, that ability to disconnect and just reconnect with myself and what was going around. And I'd missed that because I hadn't done that in so long. And I think we all need that in some form, whether it's a retreat from a week away or silent meditation, whatever it is that we choose to do. I think we need more of that in this busier, more connected world than ever before. It's just full of information and all this kind of stuff that's going on, that doesn't allow us to be able to just stop.
Yeah, unplug. Yeah, detox, digital detox as well, probably more than ever.
Well, that too as well, because everything that mattered on that journey for me was just like you felt every step. So every step that you took, you knew the next step. You could feel the heat and the warmth. And it's building into those days, little joys. Like I would get up in the morning and I would start walking, and I'd wait till I walked my first 5, 6 or 7 kilometers before I'd have a cup of coffee and a pastry or something like that. And it was just those little goals that just kept you going along the way. Yeah, it was just a very simple experience, because the places that we stayed in, it's just a bed. It's just a bed in a dormitory, and a shower, and your life is simple. You've got a 6-kilo backpack on your back with 3 t-shirts, 3 pairs of shorts, 3 pairs of socks, and that's it. Nothing else. 1 toothbrush and toothpaste and a razor, and that was it. That's all I had.
So the spiritual experience, I was wondering, why is it over there specifically there that there is like some energy as well, some energy, whatever, vortexes or something around this area? Or is it just the fact that we commit and like from A to B, we're just by ourselves and just walking with only one goal? And so is the spiritual experience in that, or also in the location, I wonder?
I think it could be a bit of both.
Okay.
In the fact that you're stopping and allowing yourself time to be able to appreciate what's around you and the people that are around you. But there also is the fact that for 1100 years, people have been walking this route. So millions of people must have done this over the centuries. And although I'm not devoutly religious or anything like that, like just stopping at various different churches along the way and just pausing and just feeling the feeling that you get from standing in that church, just looking at the surroundings and the architecture and just the presence and the silence. It just felt really, really nice. And along the way, there was lots of these little sort of stops where you just stopped and paused and appreciated and just were. And I think maybe there is a build up over the years of, an energy that route just simply does have. I could be wrong, but I certainly felt something that just felt very genuine and very, very special.
That makes sense. That would make a lot of sense, that beyond possibly even the energy of the place is the energy that generations of people doing the walk would bring. Where there is a large group of people that has a similar, especially having a similar kind of vibrational state or like mindset or inner state, which would be very positive and calm in the case of the Camino. Obviously, it works in organizations. I mean, work is the same. It's like wherever people go, a large group of people gather with a similar inner state, whether it's good or bad, that's obviously impacting everyone. So that's interesting, because that's been your life work. Well, or at least the last decade or so. I don't really know what happened for you before that, but maybe you can tell us what are you doing now and what brought you here? Like, what's your own career trajectory?
Well, I suppose one of the things since my childhood that I've been inherently interested in is an understanding of what makes me happy. So I was a very happy child with a very happy childhood, and I have lots of security and safety around me as a child. And I just enjoyed the playfulness of being a child. I love the time, specifically this time of the year when we're getting into spring and into summertime, when I used to be out playing, on the streets with my friends or up in the park or wherever it might be. That sense of timeless flow that used to happen quite regularly for me as a child. You'd lose all sense of, it's been 4 hours, we haven't had anything to eat, but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I just loved that experience of being a child. I specifically liked the summertime then, when the weather was good and the sun shone. And there's just something beautiful about the sun being in the sky, the brightness, the freedom, the possibility.
Yeah.
And I recognized that very, very, very easily as a child, that was important to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, for the rest of my life, can this happiness that I feel as a child be experienced as I got older? And then as I began to get older, I began to realize that God, life seems a little bit different. It is as soon as you get into like secondary school, and the pressures of exams and the pressures of life then after that suddenly begins to kick into place. And I went, wow, but how can I hold on to that happiness? So I've always been interested in what gave me happiness, what gives other people happiness. So consequently, from that, I worked into the world of work, and I ended up working for a production company, and I ended up having a team of 50 people that worked for me. And inherently, I was very interested in what made people click when it came to, behaviors, what motivated them and what drove them to turn up to work every day, rather than just the financials or the need to put a roof over their head. How could we sort of explore that a little bit deeper? I did work for an organization that had a very old culture, but I began to study other examples of what other organizations had been doing to transform the world of work for the better. And when I did that, I began to see something quite different. I began to see different possibilities, and I got really excited about this. So what I was excited about was two things. I was excited about the fact that when we within the workplace, we motivate people, or we drive people, or not necessarily drive people, but we allow people to be able to be the best of themselves at work. Well, that filters out into their relationships, out into the wider community, and into the wider society in general. So it made sense for me that if I was to start a society again from scratch, and if I was to do that, if I created workplaces where people spend most of their day feeling good about themselves, that transfers into the relationships, the families, the communities, and society. Everybody gains from that. And it just felt like a no-brainer of an idea of why aren't we doing that in society? Why are we creating workspaces when people go to work, they feel worse about themselves, they feel stressed, they feel overworked, they feel burdened? How is that affecting everything else? And it wasn't affecting everything else in a good way. So how can we change that?
Yeah. And like you said, so you at the time you were in a like old culture, like I can't remember the word you used specifically. What's the characteristic of the old, and are we fully in the new or not, or where are we at?
Well, I do remember starting in the organization and being a very young and enthusiastic employee. When I first came in, I started in the lower rungs of the organization, and coming into the organization being very enthusiastic. And I remember saying to somebody, when I was told, actually, one of the things that they used in this organization was a thing called Sit-by-Nelly. And Sit-by-Nelly is a very old concept. Okay. Yeah. So it means that you just sit beside Nelly. Nelly will show you what she does all day long, and you just mirror what Nelly does all day. It's called Sit-by-Nelly.
Okay. Yeah.
So I got to sit by this particular person who wasn't called Nelly, but they would show me the role and I would mirror what they did in the role, and that's what I would do. But when I was sitting with that person, they were showing me the ropes of how things worked in work. And then I went and I did something else. Like I picked up a box from somewhere else and I carried it over, and I did something else. And they went, well, hang on a second here. What are you doing that for? And I said, well, I'm just helping out that person. He says, no, you don't do that. We just do this. We don't do that. Yeah. And then you're stepping on someone else's toes by entering into their role. The union might, and it was a heavily unionized company, the union might get on your back because you're transferring roles that are not yours and that kind of stuff. But I thought, is that not just human nature to want to do the best or whatever, or help other people out, or if you have a spare second, do the right thing? And that was not deemed the thing to do in that culture, because the culture was quite old and it was heavily ruled by unions. I'm not knocking unions. I was a big fan of unions. I was a member of the unions, but there was these little regulations that made it very difficult to actually expand outside of your role within the organization.
It sounds like boxes, very
Yeah.
like thick wall boxes. You don't go from one box to another unless you have a special authorization or something.
True. Yeah. And that's it. And who wants to be stuck in a box all the time or feel caged, specifically for the whole work experience? And then slowly after a while, you could begin to see how people who came in and were quite enthusiastic about what they wanted to do, to be able to change, to be able to think and to expand, like with ideas of how the possibility of work or the world of work could be different, could very easily, after a short period of time, become that person that they first met on the day going, hang on a second here. Yeah. We don't do that. So suddenly they become the person that they went, oh, that's a weird way to work.
Yeah, like the interesting, another layer of conditioning. That's the monkey getting to do exactly like everyone else is doing, and taming their inner their instinct for what's nearly more logical.
Yeah, and that can become, and it's not that it is. I want to be, I want to be honest here. This is not because there are bad people working in the organizations. No. That's not the case. It's just that we get assimilated into the culture quite. And if the culture is this, we suddenly become part of that culture. And that's the difficulty. And possibly the issues would have been down. Well, it definitely would have been possibly down to sort of poor management or our control of the culture within the organization, or fear that it was fear about being able to tackle these situations.
So it's like wherever there is like one person coming into a larger group of people, the nature is like that, but we are gonna get sucked into it's like symbiosis. I'm not too sure of the word, but we are sort of kind of diluting into I've experienced that myself in I never worked in big corporations. My experience of working with other people was when I was working with horses and in stud farms and the big state-owned stud farms where it's very there's no extra work. It's very chilled, and you'd want to kind of spend. There would be a tea time, and if there was that much left to sweep the floor, but it was tea time, you'd stop there. You wouldn't, so the first day, you're here, it's you finish the little bit of work and it's but what are you doing? Well, there's only that. No, because you're going to mess it up for everyone else if you start doing extra work, is finishing work over tea time, something like that. So, and then and then you just kind of, so I know it's a silly example, but it's a little bit of the.
It's a very good example because it does remind me, because I did work for a production company that made biscuits, and I remember when I'd only started within the organization. One of the jobs was an extra couple of hours working in one evening to fill boxes full of particular biscuits, because the boxes had to go to a particular place or whatever, so it was just extra work where you had to fill these boxes. Okay. And I knew I was going to be there for 4 hours. And I said, 4 hours working in the evening, gosh. And we weren't allowed to wear headphones or do any of that in the evening. So I had to somehow occupy my head with what I was going to do for the next 4 hours, because it was quite a mundane job. It was very algorithmical, as we call it. And for that 4 hours, I decided, well, I'm going to create a goal in my head to see how many boxes can I do, can I have a sort of a little bit of a goal inside of my head to see how fast I can possibly work? And that was just my mind working. And there was a supervisor that came around on the hour asking us how many boxes that we had completed. And I was always about 30 boxes ahead of everybody else. And then everybody else got quite angry with me. And they said, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're making us look bad. But in my head, I was just creating some sort of a goal, some sort of a way to make it easier for me to be able to do this process. And I couldn't work any differently. And sometimes that's just the way work ends up,
Yeah. So you were in this organization experiencing this. So how did it start changing? Or did you just decide study being an interested anthropologist, looking at all this stuff, and then decided, okay, I've got enough, I'm gonna try something else somewhere else? Or did you manage to change things there? What happened?
I began to study management. I did management and industrial relations at the time, and I suppose I was in management then, so I'd moved up the ranks and I was working in management, and I absolutely adored my job, and I adored the people I worked for, and I adored the variability of my job every day, and all the different sort of tasks and all the different sort of firefighting that was involved, and all the excitement when things went well, and the relationships that we were forming with all the different people. And I just absolutely adored every single day within the organization. But then at one stage, one day, actually a couple of things came to mind. My daughter and I used to go on holiday, and every summer we'd go away for a couple of weeks. And one particular summer we were in Italy, and we were traveling down through Italy, and we stopped off in this beautiful town in Tuscany called Lucca. It's just up from Pisa, and it's a beautiful walled city. And we're cycling on our bikes around the walled city. And after we stopped off for a lemonade or a coffee at the very end of this at a cafe, and we're sitting there. My daughter looked at me and she said, "Dad," said, "this is the best holiday I've ever been on. I just don't want to end. It's fantastic." And I went, yeah, I'm delighted with that. But here's the sad news. We have to go home in 4 days. And she goes, "Well, why do we have to go home?" And I says, "Well, I have to go back to work." She says, "Well, why do you have to go back to work?" I said, "Well, I only get 2 weeks off every year." And she goes, "You only get 2 weeks holidays every year?" So something clicked inside of my mind. I said, "Yeah, actually, I only get 2 weeks holidays off every year. And I only get this 2 weeks holidays off every year. I don't get holidays in August. I don't get them in May. I can't have 3 weeks. I can't have 4 weeks." And somebody sort of got me thinking in my mind, is this it for the rest of my working life? So I'm going to be 2 weeks off for the rest of my life, and that's it. So that sort of triggered something in me. Another thing triggered in me, because I was living an hour away from where work was. So I was 50 miles away from work. So I had to travel an hour to get there every day and an hour back. And sometimes it was an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on traffic getting back. And I was sitting in my car. And as I was sitting in my car one day, when I got home, I thought about this. I said, how long do I spend in my car traveling back and forth to work? And I worked out the mathematics, and I discovered that I spent 12 and a half days of my whole year sitting in the car, just going back and forth to work. That's 12 and a half days multiplied by 24 hours.
Yeah.
So that, in tandem with what my daughter had said to me about you'll only ever have 2 weeks off every year for the rest of your life, I thought, my God, because then I worked out the mathematics of how long it would take me to get to work till I retired. And I discovered that if I kept going on this route, I would be sitting in my car for 364 days of my whole life until I got to my retirement date. Wow. So it took me a whole year of sitting in the car. And I thought about this. And when I put numbers on things, it makes things quite stark for me. And I went, wow, is this where I'm going? So I decided one day that I wanted to leave the organization. So even though things were going really well, I was successful, and if I could have stayed in that role or similar roles and worked for other organizations and moved up through the ranks, I decided I wanted to leave. So I left and I bought a round the world ticket and did some traveling and some thinking. And I came home and I thought about what was going to be the next step. And I decided I wanted to work for myself and not for a complete organization once again. And then I began to research in what's the possibilities that could happen when it comes to the world of, just not just work, but us as well. I first worked in that field. And then about 2000 and
so again, not
just the world of work, but also us, what motivates and drives us too as well, what makes us happier. So I first came with that, and I sat down and researched that, and then I began to look at the possibilities of what we could do with the world of work around about 2011 or so. I began to look into that.
Okay, nice. So what shape did it start to take? What shape did it take? Like, what were the steps? And tell us more about that.
Well, I suppose the first person or the first book that I came across that showed me the possibilities of how work could be different was a book called Maverick by Ricardo Semler.
Yeah.
What a book. And Ricardo took his father's companies over at the age of 21. So it was a company that's based in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And it was a production company. So it was very similar to the company that I was working for at the time. So they worked in production. So they had, I think they had 100 people when Ricardo took it over. There's a lot more people working for the organization now. And Ricardo would ask simple questions. It's almost like we talk about the 9 whys. If just keep asking why we do something, and you'll get to the understanding that maybe it's not possibly needed. And one of the things that really got to me was he had seen that people were coming to work every day and they were clocking in and they had to clock out. And he looked at this big queue of people clocking in the morning and clocking out. And he went, that just seems to me on a human level to be pointless. So he contacted the unions and he said to the unions, he said, I'm just looking at this whole clocking in system and clocking out, and I think it's a bit pointless. So I think I want to get rid of it. And the unions went, oh, hang on a second here. What? So let us think about this. So they had to go off and think about it. And they came back and they went, well, we're not sure about this whole idea of getting rid of the clocking system. You know, in Brazil that we get an extra 5 minutes grace if we're late. We feel we're going to lose that. And he said, well, you don't need to worry about that because the clocking, because when we cancel the clocking system, none of that's required. And they go, oh, we don't know about this. So they were very cagey and very nervous about this and very uncertain because no one had ever proposed anything like this before. He said, let's talk about this a little bit more. He said, where is your head office? I said, what do you mean, where's our head office? Where's the union head office? Where in Sao Paulo are you based? He said, well, why do you want to know that? He says, well, I want to meet you there. Let's have a meeting, but we'll have it in your head office. Yeah. So he was meeting them at their level, in their space. Yeah. And he had a discussion about this and they got rid of it. And because it didn't make sense. And there was reticence and nervousness at first, but then after a while, people began to see if we can have self-managing people where we give trust to people, greater autonomy, people will do the right thing. Yet we put all these boundaries and these different things in place to try sort of to trap, as Richard Branson would talk about it. We create rules that affect the 98% just to catch the 2%. And we'll always be able to give examples of people who abuse the system or whatever, you know, but everyone else is affected by that. Yeah. And for the first time, Ricardo began to give control and autonomy and self-organizing teams to people who worked in the productivity space. And I thought that was quite incredible. Like in his organization, what they do is every meeting that they hold within the organization is accessible to anybody. So even if they're talking about the finances and the CEOs and the CFO and all those important people are at this meeting, even the person that's cleaning the toilets is allowed to attend that meeting and speak. And that's very empowering. So everybody feels a part of the organization. So that was the first insight I had into that. And then the second one was then me beginning to read the Happy Manifesto from Henry Stewart, and that really opened my eyes to the way the world of work could be different. There's 80 observations in there that Henry makes how we could actually change the world of work for the better. Alongside with a guy called Alexander Kjerulf, who was based in Copenhagen in Denmark as well. And he was based around the whole idea of woohoo at work, whatever, you know, he was involved in the Woohoo Academy. So those three people were the first instigators of our first catalysts to be able to get me interested in the possibilities of what work could be.
Amazing. I haven't read the third one you mentioned, but I read Henry's book first, Henry's manifesto first. And I was working for myself for a long time. I finished the book and was like, oh my God, I want to apply. I want to work there. I thought, okay, that's funny. And then I read Maverick, and like it's one of the I'll put all the links for everyone. Yeah, but it's one of the best book ever. So captivating as well. I love how he started by observing everything, and then the first part was like making things even tighter, and it's like, oh my God, no, that definitely doesn't work. And then starting seeing all the steps and how far he goes is just amazing.
Well, what he's actually doing is he's got a great ability to be able to, remember we talked about when cultures become quite stale and everybody gets put into a box. Well, he talks about removing the boxes. And what actually happens now is that if you go work for that organization, you don't have an office space. You've got to try and find an office space if you get there, if you turn up to work. You don't need to necessarily turn up to work if your role doesn't require it or define it. And also if you're a production team, like if your job is to produce 300 widgets a week, he'll let you and the team organize how to produce those 300 widgets a week. So if you feel that coming in at 9 o'clock is easier than coming in at 8 o'clock because it avoids the traffic, and you can finish work at 4 o'clock rather than 3 o'clock, well, fine, go do that. So it gave control back to people.
It's like it sounds like the main word is trust, is like restoring trust. Trusting people. And what was interesting in the particular example you gave is like how the first instinct, or like people are in the box, and when the first instinct when you offer to remove the box is the people that are in the box want to hold on to the box. It's like, hold on a second, you know, like these they studied these insects, like, oh, is it ants? I don't remember, or flies, that they put them into a, you know, a glass jar, like with the lid on, and then after a while they remove the lid, and like none of them flies out because they've been like so conditioned to be in the jar, something like that. So it's incredible as human how we are like getting so used to situations that are not even necessarily good for us, but the first instinct is to just keep it.
Yeah, I think there's another experiment, wasn't there, done with a dog in a box or something like that, when they had a dog in the box, and all the dog, and what they do was they would give the dog electric shocks. So the dog was, and they put, I think they put in the box, they put some sort of a little sort of a wall or something like that, that if the dog jumped over on the other side, he wouldn't get the electric shocks. But every time the dog approached the wall, it got the electric shocks. So even then, when they stopped doing that, the dog was so conditioned to not going near the wall, it wouldn't do that. And that can be somewhat like the way we become within the working space. Yeah. And then like, so when we're in that state, okay, where we're shut down, or we're creating a world of work where there's high levels of stress, our brains work on a very simple level, in the fact that our brains can only do certain things. And when we shut down through stress, the parts of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that looks at reasoning, logic, and rationality, and maybe helps us to be able to come up with decisions and ideas, when that part of our brain is shut down and we're in this stress state, we can't do the two things at the same time. So we're either in that stress state or we're in that creative state. And unfortunately, over the years, a lot of the workspaces have left us in that stress state, with the inability to be able to you know, allow people to be able to open up and become the best that they can be.
So that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. That would be one reason why we are not embracing the change when we got an opportunity straight away. But I wonder, like, who is most resistant to change? Because that would be one question I'd love to kind of talk about, is like, what can people do to initiate change or start change? Whether, because when you're the decision maker, it seems like it would be easy, but looking at the story of Ricardo Semler, looks like it wasn't so obvious. It's not like, it's like, oh yeah, let's do that better, and everyone's on board. Far from it. But like, and also when we are not, for people who are not the decision maker and see things that could be improved, etc., what are steps that can be taken? And because I wonder, like, you know, who is actually most resistant to change? Sometimes it's not the most obvious people. I have a friend who's working for in finance, and it took on like a really big team. So in a different role, big team, and is so excited about bringing in something new, like, you know, and like a different level of like, trust and empowering people. And after a while, he got so disheartened because he realized like it seemed like the people didn't want that. They didn't want they were stuck into the rigidity of like, you know, of the processes, and not even wanting to take the initiatives when that was a bit of his idea. Like, you know, let's kind of like it's not me to take the credit. Let's the people kind of flourish, and didn't quite work as he was expecting. So
it depends on the approach that you have, because he was doing the right thing by doing that. Google have done some really good research on this. There is a project called Google Project Oxygen, where Google actually went to look. Google tried to get rid of management around about 2003. I think it was around about that time, 2003, when there was only about 300 employees, I think, with the organization. They were all generally computer engineers that worked for the organization. They don't like being managed. And Google at the time decided, let's be really radical and let's get rid of leadership. Let's get rid of management within the organization. So they did. They got rid of management. There was actually only one guy coordinating all of those employees. And very quickly they realized that they couldn't do it. He became completely overwhelmed with all the work that he had to do, whether he had to sort out rotas and in, grievances that they might have had and other things that needed to do, that needed to be done, that leadership just requires. So they reinstated leadership then again within the organization, but that stayed in the back of the mind. And about 2008, they came back to this. And he said, well, if we can't get rid of leadership within the organization, how can we find out what creates the best leader and then use those markers to be able to define what our leadership needs? And they did this, and they sat down, and initially what they did is with like thousands of hours of interviews and blind interviews, they came up with 8 characteristics that were needed for the best leaders. They've updated that now to 10, but the one thing that they found as the most significant attribute of a really good leader was simply to be a good coach. And coaches are really good in this role of they empower the people to come up with the answers and decisions themselves. So if you in a role can empower people, because there's something that happens inside of our body when we are empowered to do things. So if we're asked, rather than being told from the leader what the answer might be, if you're empowered to come up with a solution yourself, you're more likely probably to come up with a better solution. It's going to empower you. Like people who set their own targets within organizations. So really good organizations are good at being able to let people set their own targets. If you set your own targets, you're more likely to set harder targets. You're more likely to attain those targets than you would do than if you're set a target from a manager. You've got ownership of it because you've set it. It sets off what we call a seeking system. And Daniel Cable talks about this. He's a lecturer with the London School of Economics. And he's written a really good book about this. About the seeking system that goes on, this little dopamine rewards that we get from exploration, from trying something new. And some companies are really good at being able to do that. Companies like Atlassian, which are an Australian company, had started to do this a number of years ago. They own Trello, which is one of the productivity apps that we use. And what they had talked about was that they were the first company, I think, to do a 24-hour downtime period where you would have the teams were allowed to be able to come up with a project to be able to create something over a course of 24 hours. It wasn't work related, but it could be work related, and somehow how it fed back into what the organization did. But that 24 hours that those people worked on the project, it set off that seeking system inside, the idea of exploration, the idea of ownership, the idea of something new. It's very, very empowering. And really good leaders are really good. They're the ones that step back and they say, I don't have the answer. What do you think we could do in this situation?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about David Marquette, who is the leader of the Santa Fe. He was a commander in the US Navy, he was. And the Santa Fe was a submarine that he was given the role to be commander of. I think it was he was initially to have another submarine. So he spent a year working out how the submarine worked, all the different ins and outs of the engineering and the technology that was involved in it, the command and control procedures, all of those things, only to get to the end of that year to be told he wasn't getting the submarine he thought he was getting the Santa Fe, which he didn't know how it worked at all. And he turned up and he had to turn up with all of those hundreds of staff that were on board that and admit he didn't know how this worked. That in tandem with the facts that they were just told that they were going to be audited by the US Navy. And he said, I have no idea how this works. I have no idea how to lead you. So what I'm going to have to do in this situation is I have to empower you to come up with the solutions and answers. And that's what he did. The Santa Fe to this day is still the highest rated naval submarine in American history, just by him asking the questions of the staff. Well, what do you think we should do in this situation? It's very empowering.
Such a compelling example. I remember the story as you were telling it. I don't know where I've seen it or read it, but maybe in Corporate Rebels. Maybe that could be an example.
Corporate Rebels might have spoken about that. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's another great book that gives an overview. These guys are amazing, but sorry, I digress. But that this submarine, because had he had the submarine that he thought he was going to have, the story would have been pretty different. So that's so the discovery that just let people do what they know best to do. And actually sorry, go ahead.
And because those those naval officers and all the people that worked on that ship had spent years of being told what to do and just follow instructions. That was a very revelatory experience for them, because they'd never had this other experience of them having to come up with the solutions themselves. We held on, I think it was 1 or 2 different things that he would definitely not ask anybody else to do. And that was the idea of pressing a button to be able to fire one of the missiles from that. He says that is a decision that is too much of a burden for somebody else, so I'm going to hold on to that if that is ever needed to be done. But other than that, everything else was decided by those employees who had never been in power before. What an experience, and what an example of that, because a submarine is a very, very dangerous vessel. It is. There's lives at risk. You're undersea, so you make the wrong decisions or make mistakes in that environment, and things can turn quite tragic quite quickly.
Yeah, I think it's even, tying it into spirituality in a sense, but it's a great, testimony for the power of the ego. Is like when you're able to put your ego aside and say someone else knows better. Yes. And it's like having that wisdom that it's not in your hands, it might be in someone else's hands, and letting that trust. And then things change, creates like a better outcome that
great leaders make people feel good about themselves. And when a great leader does it right, everybody on the team says, we did it. It's not about the leader taking ownership of what just happened. It's great leaders ensure that happens. We did it.
That makes me think about one thing that I think Henry Stewart was making a big point out of it. Was the first time I had heard of that, is that we're all going to be good and enjoy different things in the workplace, in the work environment, in life in general, obviously. But promotion comes from becoming a manager and going down that route of going up the ranks.
Yes.
And that some people might be so much better and they enjoy the technical or the engineering or whatever, and not so much the leadership. And you mentioned it earlier.
So often we reward people. So we think the best way to reward somebody is to give them a promotion into a management or a leadership role. Like David might be very good at working as a car mechanic. He might be fantastic because he loves tinkering around with engines, understanding cause and effect and how it works. And suddenly you go, well, Dave, you've been with us for 6 years now as well, and we'd like to promote you into you're now the manager of all the other, or the leader of all the other mechanics. And Dave goes, okay, what does that involve? Well, that involves you working out the weekly rota, the holiday rota, pay, working out, supplies and all that kind of stuff. So suddenly Dave is no longer doing the role that he came to do, the cause and effect stuff, the stuff he loves tinkering around about with engines. And now he's sitting in an office staring out at all the others working on engines where he wanted to be. And it's the same when it comes to, computer engineering, and most computer engineers are very good at understanding, what happens when they create a really nice piece of code, and the excitement that they get from that. But suddenly when they're doing what Dave was doing, suddenly by creating rotors and all the other things that come with being a leadership, they've lost that experience that they get
people
from
skills.
Joy. That's it. So often, and that's why when we promote people into roles, sometimes it's not the right way to reward somebody. Maybe there's other ways to be able to go about this too as well.
Exactly. Why is it not a reward system for people who don't enjoy being like the first of the leader of the pack? I mean, and it's interesting because like to me, I see that as well as also tying in, like spiritually speaking, is like we're all different souls with different makeup blueprints, and like, again, trying to get the monkey, the elephant, and the goldfish, to be scored or judged with the same exam, when obviously, like what's the expression? If you judge an elephant based on his capacity to climb a tree, obviously it's not going to be.
I like that.
And yes, So I see that because that's what some of the work I do is like looking at soul profiles. We have such different makeup. So no wonder we feel miserable when we are put into a different fishbowl.
Yes.
And I'm saying that because our last conversation was with a friend of mine, Ryania, who does channeling. And I didn't know that she was going to do that, but she gave us the gift of a few minutes of channeling in the conversation, and whatever consciousness she was channeling, we're talking about, career and stuff, was saying, yes. So like if Bob is good at painting, like that's what Bob does, is painting. But then Bob needs to make more money, and now Bob gets to do whatever else, baking, and that's not what he's good at. That's not him. So that's his same idea here. And maybe ourselves, we don't really, we are not necessarily so anchored in what we are good at, or like what's our unique, maybe makeup blueprint, that we don't know how to navigate. And certainly, like if we end up in groups that don't have this variety of tracks for us to explore, then we end up stuck into the wrong.
One of the interesting things that I do, I do work with Henry's organization, creating, happier workplaces. We do a 4-day program or a 12-module program that we do for leadership in organizations. And we focus on all the best practices around this. And one of the things we do is we do StrengthsFinder. And StrengthsFinder is a Gallup way of looking at how we can actually focus in on what people's strengths within the workplace are. And the great thing about this is that when we do this with leaders in organizations, is the recognition that everybody has got these different strengths. So you work out, I think it's about 126 questions, and then you come up with 5 strengths you do. And like my 5 strengths, I know what they're good at, and I know what I'm capable of, and what I'm missing on. And most of the time what we do is we spend our life trying to fix weaknesses or things that we're not great on, and make ourselves better at the things that we're not great at, rather than focusing on what the things we're good at. And I'd rather have, say, myself, one of my strengths would be woo, which means winning others over. Okay, so working alongside people, I'm good at engaging with people. I'm really good at that bit. But I'm not so good at the execution of, say, and Henry used this when he was on my podcast talking about this as well. Like if he talks about it, and I'd be similar. If he went to a trade fair and he was talking about his company Happy, and he was handing out, leaflets and information and chatting with people, and people get excited talking to him, and he gets excited talking to people. But when he gets back all those sort of signed little leaflets that people said, I've been interested in this, and he gets back to the office, and he's sitting in the office and he's got all these leaflets in front of him, he's not really good at the bit of where he has to pick up the phone now and go ring people. So he's better off finding out who in the office is going to be good at that. And I'm similar in that way, that I'm not great at that execution either. And the great thing about recognizing the strengths of everybody else in the team is there's always somebody else that goes, God, yeah, I love that. Yeah, give me those. I'd be delighted to ring up somebody else and talk about this. And I think that's what's good. Happy are quite good at doing this. So what we do in Happy as well is they would regularly put jobs up on the board, up on the big writable walls that we have in there. And what Happy would do is they would actually put up all the different tasks that are involved in what's needed in head office. And it'd be to get people to put up against those tasks their name, to say, yeah, I like doing this, I like doing this. And there might be a number of roles that are just left that nobody wants to do. And what we discovered from doing that is that there are roles that people pick that other people go, oh my God, you like doing that? I say, yeah, I love doing that. And you go, oh, well, thank God you like doing that. And if there's ones that are left, what they will do is simply they will work out a rota where everybody will have to do that once every 6 weeks or so. And that'll always happen. But it's about focusing on our strengths. And I think that's what good companies are really good at being able to do that. Steve, you're good at this. Let's involve Steve in this project because he's needed for this. Julie's really good at this. We'll need her on board because we need to get over the line on this particular part of the project. And I think when companies create that awareness that we're all diverse and we're all different, we've different ways of communicating, we've got different strengths, it plays into teams that are more likely to come up with better results when it comes to projects and tasks and ideas.
I love that one. Yes, letting people choose what they enjoy doing. Geez, does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's quite it's quite off the wall when we think about it, because we don't think of about it like that at all. You know, we just give generally people roles, and whether they like it or not, and they're not going to be particularly good at some of those roles. So you're sort of pushing the company towards failure by doing that, by going, you know, well, why do you want me to do this? I can't do this. I'm not very good at this. You know, this is not going to work out well if I'm doing it. You know.
And then it creates stress, and then we're back in the. But actually, about failure, like that's another one. That's another point that I've read in the manifesto, that I like this approach to failure. That it's not something to be feared. It's like let's embrace it, because then we're finding ways that is not working, and so how can we?
So it's about celebrating mistakes. Is one of the things we talk about. It. There was a company based down in Brighton called Nixon McInnes, who were a marketing company, a social media marketing company, and they would have regularly every month a thing called the Church of Fail. And the Church of Fail meant everybody from the organization would meet in this particular place, and they would talk about all of the things that they failed on in the last month. Starting with the CEO would get on the pulpit and talk about the things that they did that didn't quite go the way they expected. And what's happening there is there's a vulnerability that comes from that. And great leadership has vulnerability. That's how we gain trust in showing that. Like, because so often we put CEOs and leaders of organizations up in a parapet as if they've been some superhuman human, and they're not. They're not a superhero. They're just as human as you or I. And when we can show that they have the same doubts, they make mistakes as the rest of us, it allows the rest of us to be able to have the understand, or to be able to recognize that, you know, making mistakes is a part of our experience. It's not about repeating mistakes over and over and over again. That's an issue and that's a problem, but it's about, you know, having the understanding that this can happen. So they do that. They used to do that every month. Like when I always use this story, Ben and Jerry's ice cream are really good at this, because beside the Ben and Jerry's office, or the head office in Vermont, what they actually have is they have, beside the factory, they have a graveyard. And in that graveyard, they have all the flavors that didn't quite, you know, do it. So they went to market, and they might have lasted only a couple of, you know, months or even a couple of years. And when they actually have a ceremony where they actually bring in, a funeral director, and he's got a big long hat, and he's got a hearse, and the flavors in that, and there's horses pulling the hearse. And they have all these mourners behind the hearse as they bring the ice cream flavor to a grave, which has a headstone, and they slowly lower the ice cream into the ground, and everybody cries and waves goodbye to the flavor that never quite cut it. Like, there's a reason why every time you pick up a Ben and Jerry's ice cream tub, you look at it and you go, how the hell did they come up with that flavor? What were they thinking when they added this to this to this? It's because they're allowed to be able to take those risks, and that's the benefits.
Yeah. That's great that you're reminding us of that. Like the fear of failure stifles all creativity.
One of the most stressful places in the world to work, and I don't know how it is now, was a place called the Misslers.
The what? Sorry,
the Misslers. So Daniel Coyle talks about this in his book, The Culture Code, where he talks about company cultures, and he talks about the Misslers are a company that are based, not a company. They're the guys who look after the American missiles for the American defense system. So these are the nuclear missiles. This is a serious job. So these are the underground missiles that are held. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of form filling. There's a lot of nervousness about roles, and it's such a stressful place to work for that they've discovered that they make a huge amount of mistakes. Now, you can't afford to have an organization making a huge amount of mistakes when you're around things like nuclear missiles. The likelihood of something going wrong is huge. And yet they're so stressed. They're so stressed about all the different sort of things they have to check, forms that they have to have. But there's no sense of trust working for that organization. There's just a sense of fear. And that sense of fear has caused that part of their brain that allows them to be creative, think logically and rationally, to disconnect. Because they're in that stress state. And if you ever recognize you being in a stress state, I know when I am, you don't come up with the right answers or the right solutions. You're nervous. So you make the wrong call. You fill in the wrong thing. You type in the wrong digit. And that's a prime example of that.
Yeah. The exact place where you don't want to be doing the mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was just yeah.
Okay, perfect. Because because we, like you pointed at, like, a couple of new approaches that some companies are embracing now. What's like, how many, like, to your knowledge, like how much of these now new ways of working are embraced in the workplace in general, which maybe are there some industry that are more prone to adopting these great practices, and what advice would you give to someone to find great places to work with?
Well, it's easier now than ever before to find a great place to work. There's more information out there. It's more transparent. You can go check Glassdoor to see the ratings that companies are being given. There's other platforms that you can use to find out what a company is like to work for. So there's more reviews out there. There's more word of mouth. There's more ways to be able to explore this, rather than go and find a book to find there's a company that seemed to be good to work for, but you could only find it in the book and it was nowhere else. The internet has allowed that freedom to be able to happen. And because it's all out there, the world of work has changed forever. Like a good example of this would have been if you went back to January 2020 and you said to your boss in January 2020, said, I'm thinking of working from home. Well, they would have looked at you with almost two heads and said, well, how do you think you're going to do that? I said, well, I'll work it out. I'll take my laptop or my computer and go home and I'll work from home. And he said, well, that's not going to happen. So you can forget about that idea. Okay, next.
Yeah.
And within the space of 2 months, suddenly we're all finding a way to work from home without a manual, without any training course to show us how to do that. And we just managed to be able to do that. That's a prime example of people using, trust and autonomy to be able to do the right thing. And we did the right thing. We all did the right thing. We navigated through a pandemic and we found a way to be able to work at the same time. Yeah. Whilst also navigating all the dangers that was going on outside. So that's a prime example of how the world of work is changing. And it's not going to go back to this suddenly that we're turning up to the same space for 5 days a week. That's gone. So that's gone out the window completely. Also, what's actually happening now is that we're actually questioning the 5-day working week. Yeah. So now, more than ever, the conversation is around the 4-day working week. There was a pilot scheme just done in Ireland at the moment, just in Ireland, which the results came through last November regarding the 4-day working week. And there were 72 companies in the UK just finished a pilot on the 4-day working week. Oh, nice. And that conversation is moving from a conversation to a reality. So now it's becoming a reality for companies like Happy or a 4-day working week. And that started off initially as a trial and then now has become a permanent part of the way they work. Think Productive, another company in the UK, work a 4-day week and have been doing so since 2011. Perpetual Guardian, Andrew Barnes from Perpetual Guardian, who you would have seen speak at the Happy Workplace Conference 2020. He spoke about his organization, which is an insurance company based in Auckland, started to do that back in 2017, consulted all the staff, put all the right, measures in place to be able to help people understand what was going to happen, looked at the research, the science, had really good consultation. And now he consults with some of the biggest companies around the world, including Unilever, to be able to help them to be able to create the 4-day working week. Wow. So the 4-day working week now, which when I had conversations with people about this about 4 or 5 years ago, people would go, that's a bit pie in the sky and that's not going to happen. It's a reality now. And what's actually happening, Julie, now at the moment is this, that people are beginning to look at where they can work. And they're going to hear that your company or this company down the road is a 4-day working week. And they go, well, I'm turning up for 40 hours a week in this organization. I'm not particularly enjoying the experience. And everybody's talking about how great it is to work for that 4-day working week down the company because they've got things nailed. They're productive. They get things done. They treat their staff well. They look out for their well-being. They put all these parameters in place to be able to help them to be able to do that. And then they get that time off. They just look different. There's less burnout, there's more involvement in what the company do. They're more excited about work when they turn up on a Monday. That's the difference. And I think because the genie is out of the bag, that people are beginning to look at different ways of working and say, I want a bit of that. Same with Happy Workplaces, when they're finding out that certain workplaces are looking at their staff and thinking, how can we empower them? What can we do to give them the right tools, to be able to have freedom within guidelines, to have greater autonomy? We build trust into what we do, and we look out for them as human beings. Where people go, says, well, I want to work there. I don't want to work for that old organization that's been working this way for years, that treat me like this. And the old organizations are probably trying to throw money at this, maybe a lot of the financial organizations, although that's beginning to change. They think that if we just pay people more, they'll stay within this high burnout, stressful environment. The truth is, it's all changing.
Yeah. That's what I find tying to spirituality, particularly there, is like the money, the relationship to money. It might work on our journey where we are discovering ourselves and maybe like still we're like quite ego driven, and so the money is a great appeal. And then at some stage on our journeys, when the little voice inside starts to wake up, suddenly no amount of money is going to cut it, versus feeling self-expressed.
Yes, so, that's it. Like, and that's at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the self-actualization.
So what you're saying is, because there are many more companies that are avant-garde now in that arena, they're basically going to drive the rest. The rest of them are going to have to step up, because everyone...
Because the new talent is not going to go to those older organizations. The new talent is looking for the best places to work. And if you can offer me...
Rightfully so,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can offer me a place to work where I feel like that I am, there's somebody looking out for me as a human being, who cares for me as an individual, who wants to empower me, who gives me a chance to be able to move levels to where I want to be able to do, to move, well, then I'm going to go with that organization. And maybe it doesn't involve me having to turn up to a physical office, or it doesn't involve me having to work 5 days a week. Well, if that's the way it is, that's absolutely fine by me.
And for to the people who want to stay where they are, whether at different places of decision making, whether they have it or not, what's the advice to these people who want to start changing the dynamic in their organization? It's like, what can they start with?
Well, it's not always an easy thing to be, but if you're just an employee in the organization, it can be quite a difficult thing. You can't change from the bottom. It's very difficult to change it from the bottom. But it's much, if you're a progressive leader that wants to be able to make some changes, well, go and study the things that I've been talking about, whether it's reading books like Henry Stewart's The Happy Manifesto, or even Laszlo Bock's work. He was in Google, or even Ricardo Semler, or even talk to me, or even talk to Henry about, how we can actually help leadership within your organization be able to look at it differently. It's about empowering people. It's about allowing people, creating organizations where people feel good about themselves. And people always do their best work when they feel good about themselves. Even if you were to invest in the happiest workplaces, the organizations where people feel most engaged, if you were to do that, you would actually see a huge return on investment, rather than just investing in the Standard & Poor's top 500. I know that's been done by Dan Ariely, Dan Ariely is an organizational psychologist who talks about this, and what he has done is he created a fund called the Irrational Capital Fund. And the Irrational Capital Fund is a hedge fund that actually just focuses on organizations that have really high levels of engagement in the organization. They don't look at the rest. They don't look at the finances and all the other stuff. They look at this. If the company treats their employees well, they'll invest in them. And they've done that. They've outperformed the Standard & Poor's top 500 just by doing that with their fund. Wow. Quite incredible. So the finances prove it too.
Yeah, that's powerful. Okay, so people need to know that with the decision makers, they don't have to do that alone. There are people like Henry's organization, that are specialized in helping them turning these things around. So it's important to know as well, because there's been a period of time where workplace wellness and bringing people for massages or stress management, and I mean, it's great. But the next level is changing the structure that makes people happy in the first place, so they don't need necessarily the stress management or the remedial thing. So you're going at the root cause.
Yes, because this is definitely, because I see this with organizations a lot of the time. There might be a specific, week of workplace happiness, or a day of workplace happiness, or whatever it might be that the organization might have, where they talk about this. They might get somebody to come in and speak about it. And suddenly then when that day or that week is finished, they just revert back to type. And if the company was a stressful and difficult organization to work for, like, having one day or 1 week of focusing on it is just ticking a box, and it isn't solving the problem. And it has to be an ongoing thing within the organization, that the way we treat our workers, or the way everybody in the organization feels when they turn up to that environment, is a constant. It's a year-long thing that everybody is looked out for. So I think that's the workplaces that are gaining the most, the ones that have, it's a constant. It's not just people turning up for, yoga classes at 12:30 or whatever during the day. They're great in themselves. And many organizations have found this too as well, because you can provide free fruit and football tables and, all those different types of things, but that's not workplace happiness. It's bigger than that. It's the culture.
I find it like, it's remedial. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a open wound with a broken bone. Yes. But what you do in helping companies is like, you're the surgeon that goes and fixes the broken bone in the first place. So that's, So Stephen, like, any last word, or is there a question I didn't ask that I should have, that you want to leave people with?
No, I just want people to think about this. And like I've said this at the start, like, the reason why we create workplaces feel good about themselves, or what we call happier workplaces. And for some people, it can feel like a real sort of soft approach to work, but it's not, or a sort of a very light approach to work. And it's not, because the word happiness can be bandied around in many different ways. But the truth is, when people feel good about themselves, they do their best work. And it's about us providing them, leaders within the organization, with being able to give people the right tools to be able to do their best work. Because when people feel good about themselves, everything begins to change. And that just not only affects the organization, the profitability of the organization, the productivity of the organization, the well-being of the employees, but it also affects the relationships outside of that, as I've said, the personal relationships, the wider community, wider society. Everybody benefits when we go down this road.
Thank you. Because we made a full loop. You mentioned that at the start, that it's not just about work, it's about community at large, and contributing to the whole in a positive way, which is a very spiritual concept. I mean, so I
always bring it back to the and people that might have heard, just to finish, Bronnie Ware was a palliative care nurse. You may have heard of her, and Bronnie would have talked about the 5 regrets of the dying, and every single male patient, just because of the demographic of the patients that came to her, every larger proportion of her patients were male who had worked. And she has said, every male patient said, I wished I hadn't worked so hard. I wished I spent more time with the people I loved, doing the things that I cared about. And when we get to the last experience of our life and realize that we wished our life had been different, that's very stark. We want to ensure that people get to the last stages of their experience and they don't feel that they need to redo it again because they felt they went down the wrong road, or it just didn't work out the way they expected.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. For everyone to think about, once thinking about it now, because I often think about that. Okay, what am I going to regret more, that I did that extra whatever on the computer, or that I did spend time with my family? Think about it now, and don't wait on the last day to regret not having done the thing you want to do, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I feel like, there's a good talk for hours. But thank you. It's a great overview about different ways to work now. So I really, really enjoyed it, and might see you again on another, in a couple of months, see how things are going. So thank you, everyone, and I'll see you for the next conversation real soon.
Thank you very much,
so much,
Julie.
Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.